Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Saturday everybody. It's the weekend, so we normally begin with a foreign affairs related story, and today we discuss Taiwan. One of the big geopolitical questions on many minds this year is of course the risk of a conflict over the Taiwan Strait. Yesterday, Friday, 3 influential US voices on this question, namely Andrew Erickson, Professor of Strategy in the Naval War College's China Maritime Studies Institute, Gabrielo Lins, a Fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and Matt Pottinger, former US Deputy National Security Advisor from 2019 through 2021, and editor of the forthcoming book, The Boiling Moat, Urgent Steps to Defend Taiwan, published a big piece in Foreign Affairs called The Taiwan Catastrophe, What America and the World Would Lose if Taiwan Took the Island. We begin today's video by examining some of the points in the article, which gives us a good look at how elite policymakers are discussing this issue in Washington. The authors argue that Washington and its allies face many potential geopolitical catastrophes over the next decade, but nearly all pale in comparison to what would ensue if China annexed or invaded Taiwan. Such an outcome, one US official put it, would be a disaster of utmost importance to the United States, and I am convinced that time is of the essence. That was General Douglas MacArthur in June 1950. More than 70 years later, the authors write, MacArthur's words ring truer than ever. Quote, now, as then, Taiwan's geography matters. A self-governing Taiwan anchors Japan's defense and denies China a springboard from which it could threaten US allies in the Western Pacific. But unlike in the 1950s, when Taiwan was under the authoritarian rule of Chiang Kai-shek, today the island is a full-blown liberal democracy whose subjugation to Beijing's totalitarianism would hinder democratic aspirations across the region, including in China itself. And unlike in MacArthur's time, Taiwan today is economically crucial to the rest of the world by virtue of its role as the primary producer of advanced microchips. A war over the island could easily cause a global depression. End quote. The authors argue that yet another key difference between MacArthur's time and today is the flourishing of a wide network of US allies across the Indo-Pacific, countries that rely on US support for their security. A Chinese seizure of Taiwan could trigger a race among nations to develop their own nuclear arsenals as US security guarantees lost credibility. Authors also argue that in recent years, Xi Jinping has shown an impatient determination to resolve Taiwan's status in a way his predecessors never did. He has ordered a meteoric military build-up, instructing Chinese forces to give him by 2027 a full range of options for unifying Taiwan. Quote, these signals are triggering debate in Washington and elsewhere about whether Taiwan is strategically and economically important enough to merit protection through the most challenging of contingencies. But make no mistake, whether one cares about the future of democracy in Asia or prefers to ponder only the cold math of realpolitik, Taiwan's fate matters. End quote. The piece unpacks these ideas and arguments at length. One point worth lingering on here are the concerns around the damage to the current world order, a trend we have already seen with Ukraine and the Middle East conflagrations. The authors write that through outright war or intense coercion, quote, Chinese annexation of Taiwan against the will of its 24 million people would disrupt the global order in ways unseen since World War II. End quote. Beijing might not stop after annexing Taiwan too, they argue. China is grabbing land in Bhutan and engages in border skirmishes with India. It pursues disputes with all its maritime neighbors. It is actively challenging Japan's claims over the islands that Tokyo administers and calls Senkaku, as well as territorial claims of 5 other governments in the South China Sea. Japan would be in a far weaker position to defend its territory were Taiwan under Beijing's control. Japan's defensive strategy relies on the ability to threaten People's Liberation Army forces that approach, penetrate, or venture beyond the so-called First Island chain. PLA doctrine stresses precisely this point, as one Air Force textbook emphasizes, quote, as soon as Taiwan is reunified with mainland China, Japan's maritime lines of communication will fall completely within the striking ranges of China's fighters and bombers, end quote. The fall of Taiwan would be even worse for the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries, the authors argue. Beijing would have the power to complicate US access to East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Indian Ocean, the littoral of the most populous, economically active part of the world. Quote, worse, by establishing an indisputably dominant position in East Asia, she could pursue preeminence globally. The military resources, planning and training that have long been concentrated on taking Taiwan could, following a successful annexation, be used for projecting power throughout continental Asia, the Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. China could even attempt to make inroads into the Atlantic Ocean. America's own history shows how achieving regional preeminence facilitates global power projection. Only by dominating the Western Hemisphere in the 19th century was the United States able to become a global superpower in the 20th. End quote. It is a thought-provoking article and well worth a read for anyone interested in this space, especially, as I said, as it gives us insight into how policymakers in Washington are debating this question. I'd be interested to know what you think of these points in the comments below. Next up, the Chinese economy. But just quickly, if you're enjoying the episode, as always, if you can like and subscribe, this is a huge help for the channel. And Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below for those who want to go the extra mile and help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, the first half of today's video was quite heavy. For the second half, we look at the economy. And first up, the numbers coming out for the Lunar New Year period. Travel numbers can act as a good proxy for consumption and consumer confidence. China is currently struggling with low confidence, as we know, and deflation going into 2024. Passenger car sales fell 26% in January compared to December, according to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, for example. Soft house prices, as well as a devastating decline in the stock market, have especially dampened consumer sentiment. So policymakers in Beijing will be following the travel numbers closely too. Now, some of these data are official numbers, so we take them with a grain of salt. According to official numbers published yesterday, more than 61 million rail trips were made in the first 6 days of the National New Year holiday, the highest level of the last 5 years, and a 61% increase over the same vacation period in 2023. We note, though, that surpassing 2023 is a low bar, as the country was dealing with its massive COVID wave as it opened up. Some initial data on road and air trips during the holiday also showed improvement over last year. Hotel sales on Chinese e-commerce platforms surged more than 60% from a year earlier too, though again from low bases. According to data from fintech firm Ant Group, who owns Alipay, Chinese tourists spent 70% more on the platform overseas compared to 2019. However, this is likely more a reflection of a higher number of overseas vendors accepting Alipay rather than a 70% boost in spending overseas. According to the technology giant, top destinations for Chinese travelers were Hong Kong, Japan, Thailand, and Australia. According to Bloomberg calculations based on data from Maoyan Entertainment, initial domestic box office receipt data was less promising. Chinese cinemas took in 4.48 billion yuan in the first 4 days of the 8-day vacation period, down about 2% from last year. So, what should we think about these data? It's positive on balance, but may not be enough. A wait-and-see approach is advised. Gary Ng, a senior economist at Natixis SA, expressed to clients in a note this week, quote, "It is uncertain if the travel numbers can fully offset the consumption shift away from durable goods and the downgrade trend for some residents. The extra spending cannot replace traditional big-ticket items like automobiles." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Saturday, have a lovely weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.